There was a time when the hills of Red Valley echoed with her laughter. Lila Carson, the proud daughter of Chief Carson, the man who owned half the valley and ruled the other half with his heart, had been the kind of girl the wind itself envied. She rode her wild white mare, Starfall, like she was born from the sky, her golden hair whipping against the breeze, her eyes bright with the fire of a girl who believed nothing in this world could ever break her. But that was before the accident, before the storm that changed everything. One night, as the ranch prepared for the annual rodeo, lightning struck across the hills. Lila, reckless and brave, had ridden out into the thunder to bring back a herd spooked by the storm. She didn't see the ravine until it was too late. Starfall stumbled, and when the dust settled, the horse was gone, and Lila lay broken. They said she should have died that night, but she didn't. The doctors said she would never walk again, that she was lucky to even be alive. But luck felt cruel when your legs refused to move. For months after, the Carson ranch went silent. The proud chief, who once commanded a dozen ranch hands, barely spoke anymore. His daughter, the heart of the valley, stayed locked inside her room, staring out the window at the fields she once raced across. Her laughter had vanished. Her smile had died. The people whispered that the chief's spirit was fading with hers. Friends who once visited began to stay away, uncomfortable in the shadow of tragedy. And slowly, the girl who once had the whole valley at her feet became just a story, a reminder of how quickly the world could break even the strongest hearts. It was early spring when the silent cowboy rode into town. No one knew where he came from. His name was Luke. That's all he said when the stable hand asked. He had a scar running from his jaw to his neck, eyes the color of a storm, and a horse black as midnight. He spoke little, worked hard, and kept to himself. Folks said he was looking for peace. Others said he was running from something. But one thing was certain. Wherever he went, silence followed. The kind of silence that carried pain and memory. One morning, as Chief Carson stood by the corral watching the men mend fences, he saw Luke working alone, calm, steady, never wasting a word. There was something about that quiet determination that reminded him of his daughter before the fall. So when the chief needed someone to tend the upper pasture, the one near the old Carson house where Lila stayed, he sent Luke. The cowboy didn't question, didn't argue, just nodded and rode up toward the lonely house on the hill. From her window, Lila saw him the first day, a stranger on horseback, tall and wordless, working like the world owed him nothing. She didn't know his name, didn't care. She had stopped caring about much of anything. Her world had become small, a room, a bed, and the endless ache of what used to be. Her legs thin and still beneath. The blanket felt like a curse. Sometimes she'd close her eyes and pretend she could still feel the grass beneath her boots. But dreams are cruel when the truth waits to remind you. Days passed. Luke came and went, fixing fences, mending roofs, never looking her way. Yet every time she glanced from her window, he was there, steady, unshaken. There was something haunting about his silence. The other ranch hands laughed and talked. Luke worked and vanished, and somehow Lila began to wait for the sound of his horse each morning. She didn't know why. Maybe it was because he didn't look at her with pity. Maybe it was because he didn't know her story, or didn't care. One afternoon, while Luke was working near the porch, Lila's little dog Daisy darted out the door and barked at him. Luke stopped, crouched down, and gently patted the dog's head. That was the first time Lila spoke to him. "She doesn't like strangers," she said from her wheelchair near the door. Luke looked up, his hat low over his eyes. "Guess I ain't a stranger anymore," he said quietly, almost to himself. That simple line, plain as dust, lingered in her heart longer than it should have. After that day, she started talking more. Little things at first, about the weather, about the ranch, about how much she hated being stuck inside. Luke would listen, nod, and reply only when needed. He never offered sympathy, never said, "I'm sorry," never looked at her like she was broken. And that quiet respect was what began to wake something inside her that had been sleeping for far too long. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Lila asked him, "Why do you never smile?" Luke paused, looking at the horizon. "Ain't much to smile about," he said, "but you keep working." You keep going, she pressed. He turned to her, eyes steady. Because stopping don't make the pain go away. That line hit her harder than she expected. She didn't realize until later that Luke carried his own ghosts, the kind that made him understand silence better than most. That night, Lila couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about his words, about how pain doesn't stop just because you give up. Maybe, she thought, maybe she'd been punishing herself for surviving. Maybe she'd been waiting for someone to remind her that she was still alive. Days turned into weeks. Slowly, she began to roll herself out onto the porch while he worked. Sometimes they didn't speak at all. She'd just sit there watching him fix things, and he'd nod politely, as if her presence meant something. One day he brought her a wildflower, dusty and crooked, and said, "Found it near the stream. Figured it's still standing, so maybe it's got a story." She took it. And for the first time in months she smiled. The chief noticed the change. His daughter began eating again, talking again. There was color in her cheeks, and a strange calmness in her eyes. He didn't know what had caused it, but he had a feeling that quiet Cowboy had something to do with it. But not everyone was happy. The other ranch hands started whispering that the chief's daughter was wasting her time on a drifter, that the man was trouble. And trouble, in a small valley like Red Ridge, spreads faster than wildfire. One night, as the chief called Luke into his office, the old man said, "You've done good work here, son, but people are talking. You understand?" Luke just nodded. "Let them talk," he said softly. "I didn't come here for people." The chief frowned. "Then why are you here?" Luke hesitated. For a moment his eyes flickered with something, grief maybe. "To keep a promise," he said simply, and turned to leave. That night, as the moon shone cold over the valley, Layla dreamed again, not of the fall, but of the wind. For the first time since the accident, she saw herself standing, running, free, and in that dream, somewhere in the distance, she saw Luke, silent as ever, watching her with a look that wasn't pity, but quiet belief. When she woke up, tears filled her eyes. She didn't know if it was just a dream, or if something in her heart was finally beginning to heal. The girl who once rode the wind was still broken, but for the first time, she believed maybe she wasn't beyond saving. Maybe some souls, no matter how lost, were meant to find each other. And as the dawn rose over Red Valley, the paralyzed chief's daughter whispered to herself, "Maybe I can learn to live again."